It's round 6 of the Superbet Classic in Bucharest, Romania. And in this video, I'm going to show you the most spectacular game of the round. With the white pieces, we have, of course, Alireza Firouzja. Always fire on the board when he is playing. Always creative things are being seen from his games. And he's playing against the rock-solid Wesley So. So it's an interesting clash of playing styles. And let's see how that works out in this game. I'm going to bring you all the highlights, and I'm just asking one favor. Please help the channel to grow by subscribing to this channel, give this video a like, and if you're really generous, consider please to make a small donation to the PayPal link below this video. Thanks for all your support, guys. And off here we go. Firouzja playing with white goes for 1d4, knight f6, and he is playing a lot of different things. Early in the tournament, he played also the move bishop f4 against Fabiano Caruana, the tournament leader. But for this occasion, he switches back to the main lines with c4, e6, knight c3, bishop b4. It's the Nimzo Indian. And we have seen that earlier in the tournament in the game. Fabiano Caruana managed to win against Bogdan Deyak. In that game, he played the move e3 to follow it up with the move a3. But here, Firouzja starts with a3, which is even sharper. It's the same-ish variation. Bishop takes knight, pawn takes back. Black goes for the move b6, so the bishop can be developed. And now the move f3. And here we see a big difference between systems where e3 has been played already, or white has omitted that move, because with white's last move f3, white is contemplating to occupy the center with the move e4. Look at that massive pawn center, counting on the support of the pawns on c3 and f3 at the same time as well. So super interesting opening already. Knight c6. White brings the pawn to e4, and now knight a5. Now, if you see this for the first time, you think, what the heck is Wesley So doing here? But this knight on a5, it's actually very logical square in this opening, because white no longer has a b-pawn to kick that knight away. And the big plan is to put a bishop on a6 and hit the pawn on c4. That is usually considered to be the main weakness for white. At least that's the sort of counterplay black is looking for. But now, super interesting moment already on move 8, as Firouzja played here the move c5. This has rarely been seen, and he is just giving up the pawn, because after pawn takes c5, he doesn't really want to take back. Then he ends up with a fractured pawn formation with isolated double pawns on the c-file. But he says, okay, I've given up that pawn. I'm continuing here with the move rook b1. So the rook is doing well on the b-file, making it harder for black, for instance, to use the b-file at some point. Also the bishop on c8 cannot easily be developed. Sometimes the knight on a5 is vulnerable as well. Ideas with queen a4 to hit the unprotected knight at the side of the board is a very common idea in such positions as well. And I'm pretty sure this was part of Firouzja's home preparation. And definitely here Wesley got a bit surprised. He started to think for the first time in the game. And there are, in fact, a number of interesting moves. Here, Wesley So played the move pawn takes d4. Looks very logical, but maybe not the most challenging move. For instance, there is one super spectacular idea for black, which I don't want to analyze in depth, but I want to have pointed it out to you. Maybe you can use it in one of your own games. Knight takes e4. Such a surprising piece sacrifice, with the point that if you take that knight, the queen comes out to h4 with check. And the king is in trouble here. If the king goes on a run here with king d2, you give another check on f4, king c2, you grab another pawn with check. Now you cannot block with the bishop. There's queen takes g2. That's not good. If you go queen d3, then you can put even the bishop on b7. And the bishop is ready to recapture on e4 with a check, so that the rook on b1 is vulnerable. This is super complicated, but I'm pretty sure this was part of Firouzja's home preparation. Now let's get back to the game. You're not too interested in all these sidelines. You want to see what happened? Well, here you get it. Pawn takes, d4 was played. White recaptures, And as you can see, black is here a pawn up. But the pawn is not too great. And the main problem for black is how to complete development. All these pieces are still on the back rank. And white is having a very nice space advantage and easy developing moves in prospect. So black can consider, of course, here a move like castling. Looks okay. But c5 was played. And frankly speaking, I'm not a fan of this move. I understand some part of it, as after pawn takes c5, there are always ideas for black, perhaps to come back with a knight to b7 to hit the pawn, or win the pawn on c5 at some point anyway, maybe with the help of the queen. But you are really weakening your dark square. So white has already the pawn back now, black castled, and the bishop comes to f4. Very ambitious square. e3 is another interesting square to keep the pawn supported. Bishop f4 has the advantage that the bishop may come to d6, and it also covers the open file, so the black rook can never come there. Super interesting position, and probably move like rook e8 should be considered. But knight b7 was played immediately. Now the queen comes to d4, and I'm pretty sure that both players had been calculating a lot of different lines at this point. And it could be that the initial plan of Wesley So was now to play the move queen a5 check with a double attack, hitting the pawn on c5 as well. But there is queen b4, and there's no real opportunity to win the pawn on c5, because at the end there is bishop d6. Now it is a double attack and white is winning material. Now you understand that on the previous move, having inserted this move rook e8 with the idea also to play e5 and challenge the bishop, the rook on f8 is never under threat. But after knight b7, queen d4, now the move rook e8 was played. But there is knight e2, very important developing move. After queen a5, the knight comes over to the queen side, solving the check, and still this pawn on c5 can be captured in two different ways. But if you take with a knight on c5, there is rook b5 with a double attack, and black is in huge trouble. The alternative is to take with a queen on c5, but now again it becomes a pawn sacrifice. Black is a pawn up after the exchange of queens, but after bishop e3, white is developing tremendous initiative on the queen side. The knight is in trouble, and if you protect it, the knight can come to b5 with huge threats against pawn weakness on d6, a knight fork on c7, and well, this is very, very unpleasant. So this was well calculated by Firouzja, and also he must have seen that the pawn on a3 cannot really be captured. If you capture that pawn, there is knight b5 attacking the queen, and knight c7 is coming very soon with a huge grip on the dark squares. Look at this bishop, the knight on b7, they're out of play. It's very, very unpleasant. So here, instead of capturing any of these pawns, black played a6 to prevent the knight from coming to b5 anytime soon. But the bishop comes back to e3 to protect the pawn, and you cannot get rid of the pawn any longer. And how should black get the bishop into play? That's not easy at all. White also has plans, for instance, to put a queen on b4 to consolidate the queen side with an overwhelming positional advantage for white in that case. So black decided to take the pawn on a3. Now, of course, knight b5 no longer possible because of the pawn on a6, but white can seize the initiative with this move, e5. Excellent idea. The knight is in trouble. If it goes to the side of the board, it can easily get trapped. So the knight has to come to the center. And now you take on d5. Pawn takes d5. Don't be greedy. You cannot take the pawn on d5 because the bishop on e3 can just be captured. That is a mistake, but it at the same time explains white's next move. As white starts here with king f2, it's an excellent idea. You don't have to castle. You can bring your king into safety on f2 by protecting your bishop at the same time, so that after black's next move, black has to do something with a knight in order to get the bishop out as well. So knight e8 was played. Very interesting idea. Knight is on its way either to c6 or e6. But now, since your king is protecting the bishop on e3, you can simply capture on d5. And position is really bad for black. If you play knight c6 with the idea to hit the pawn on e5 for the second time, white can play f4. Everything is under control. You put your bishop out next, the rook from h1 will come into play, and white is really having a good time here. Instead of knight c6, black played here the move bishop b7, attacking the queen, but it's not a good move. But it was in fact very difficult to suggest something better for black, because the reason it's not good is you can simply capture with a rook on b7, so that you have now two minor pieces, two super bishops to play against the two rooks. And well, obviously you cannot take the pawn on e5. There is queen takes a8 with mate to follow. Black instead played rook a b8, attacking the queen. The queen comes back to d5 to support the pawns and any sort of counterplay. Let's say queen b2 check. There is bishop e2, and the bishops are controlling the board. They are protecting the king, most importantly. Rook takes e5 play. That was the idea of queen b2, so that you can take the pawn. But now queen d4 is a very nice and solid move, keeping everything protected. Don't be too greedy. There was no need to take on d7, for instance, because then there are always ideas like rook b2 e8, and you can feel all of a sudden this pressure on the e file. Queen d4 is a good move, consolidating your advantage, forcing the exchange of queens. If queen goes away, the rook on e5 will be hanging. Black played here the move a5, says that, okay, we can go for the exchange of queens, but then at least I take back with a rook. But now, very elegant move played by Firouzja as he went for rook b1, bringing the rook into play. Now, exchanging queens is no longer an option. There's rook b8 with checkmate. So you take with the queen on b1 instead. And then it means there is queen takes e5. So we have still a position with two bishops against the rook. Black even has a passed pawn. If black has all the time in the world, this a pawn is going to be decisive. But the problem is black's king. King h8 was played. You may think, what's the idea of this move? Well, there is bishop d4. That was the planned move by white anyway, threatening checkmate on g7. Black has to go for something like f6. And now the queen goes to d6. Very good move. You understand now why the king is on g8. I mean, otherwise they could always have followed the check by the queen or the bishop on this diagonal. Now the queen is fantastically placed on d6, hitting the pawn on d7, and also keeping an eye on the rook. It's still defended by the queen on b1, but you understand now that also the black queen can barely move. Queen b7 was played to keep both the pawn and the rook defended, but here it's a crunch time. White is about to strike here with a very nice idea. Bishop takes f6, opening up the black king side. If you do take the bishop, it's queen takes f6. And after king g8, there is bishop c4. And the black king is caught in a mating net. If you block with d5, you can capture the pawn en passant, opening up the diagonal for the bishop again. And after blocking with the queen, you can just capture the queen and it will be made in a few moves. So that is not offering black any salvation here either. Instead of taking that bishop, rook e8 was played, hoping for some sort of counterplay on the e-file, but there is absolutely nothing you can do here. I mean, bishop c3 was played, and white is just happy to have won a pawn. Very important pawn, because now the black king is in huge trouble. This bishop is putting enormous pressure against the pawn on g7, and very soon the queen will come as well. Black resigned here. I should also point out that the pawn on a5 is also threatened to be taken. If you, for instance now, push the pawn to a4, there is this idea with queen h6, threatening checkmate. Look at this beautiful pin. The queen can't be taken. If you protect the mate with your rook, rook g8, defending the pawn, now you can put the other bishop in the direction of the black king. Bishop d3, so that queen takes h7 is made on the next move. Super bishops. This is how you win games, to use the bishop pair in such effective manner, attacking the king. Very impressive game. After the move bishop c3, as I said, Wesley So resigned at this point, and it's a very important bounce back victory for Alireza Firouzja. He lost in the first round to tournament leader Fabiano Caruana, who is actually on 4 out of 6 now. Alireza Firouzja is in shared second place, half a point behind Fabiano Caruana. And with 3 rounds to go, still anything can happen. Let's see what's going to happen in the next couple of rounds. Thanks for tuning in and see you very soon and help the channel to grow. Boom, boom, boom. Doei.